So I'm now inside the Scarp 2, and I thought I'd do part of this review from inside so you can see how it actually works in practice. A lot of reviews don't show you with the gear and everything inside, so yeah, here you can have a look. So I've got a full 4-season setup in here, 4-season sleeping bags, wide and thick pads. Obviously there's 2 people here, one of them Instagramming, and yeah, we've actually got quite a lot of space at the back and at the feet as well, even with these long pads in there, so there's plenty of room for all the gear in here as well. So we've got both backpacks at the back, all the camera gear, drone, everything you can imagine is all in here as well. One of the strong points I think to mention about the Scarp is that we have all these corner struts that raise the inner and the bottom of the tent up off the ground. So actually a lot of, or all of, the space inside of the Scarp is usable. So you can sleep here with your head, and it's not going to be touching the ceiling and getting condensation. And the same with the feet as well, your feet aren't going to be touching the ceiling either. And it means you can stack things up at the bottom of the tent and just get a little bit more space. A lot of tents tend to slope down into that area, so you've actually just got useless space that you can't use. And I think right now you can probably see it's getting quite windy, and it's doing a good job of holding that. It's probably about 20-mile-per-hour winds at the moment, gusting. Other things from inside the tent, it's very minimal, so that is one of the cons. It's very minimal in terms of pockets and things, but if you're like me, I just like to dump my stuff around anyway, and I'm not really that fussed about organising it because I've got it all in like little bags and things anyway, so I know where my stuff is. It's also got some tie points here which I've put on a washing line, and you can put, I don't know, drying things out on there, hanging gloves, things like that. Now in this case we've got some very lightweight fairy lights that we use. In terms of layout, there's also obviously the 2 vestibules on each side, a door each side, which is really handy when you need to get out in the toilet and there's 2 people sleeping in there. Both got space either side for gear bags. Overall, it's absolutely massive in here. I'm only 5'7", so it doesn't say a lot, but easily if you were 6 foot you'd have plenty of room. The highest point of the tent, obviously sat down, I struggle to reach the top. And I can sit quite far back either side of the tent without my my head touching the inner as well. And it's probably worth noting that there is quite a lot of space between the inner and the outer tent, so even if you're touching the top, it's not touching against the outer and getting wet. Obviously in here I've also got the 4-season mesh, which is actually super warm. You can really feel the difference between the outside and the inside with this material. And it's also quite waterproof, so if you get any condensation it doesn't come through. Speaking of condensation, the tent performs, I'd say, okay. This is the older Scarp 2, so the vents aren't quite as big and they're on the ceiling here, but there's only been one time where I've had condensation actually come onto the inner and actually be a problem, and that was about -13 degrees, and I slept really toasty in here. We had hot water bottles, I couldn't open any of the vents, and I had the fly down to the floor as well, just because it was swirling snow and it would just come in otherwise. So we couldn't have picked a worse situation for condensation, and that's the only time I've had an issue, but it wasn't the end of the world. So I think that's everything to be said from the inside, other than one thing to note is that the floor can be quite slippy. The tent, when I got this, I bought it off another guy, and he'd put some silicone glue just across the floor, which actually does help with the pads not slipping so much. But a slippy floor is definitely something to think about with this tent, but it's an issue with a lot of lightweight tents as well. So I just thought I'd show the cooking setup inside of the Scarp and how it works, because obviously that's a big part of camping. As you can see, it's quite windy right now, so I'm using the porch space to protect the stove while I'm cooking. So at the minute I've got the front door open, and I'd say this is how you're going to cook whenever it's not raining or really windy. So it's quite easy. The way that the door sits, you can sit feet out looking out with your view and camping at the same time. What you can't see is behind here I have a full 65 litre rucksack back here. That fits down the side. This is a bit different to other tents, and something that took a little bit of getting used to when I first got the tent is how I slotted the pack in there like that. It didn't feel like there was a lot of space, but once you're actually used to it, it does make sense, and there's plenty of space that side. You've also got that again this side, and then it leaves you with this little bit of area here as your cooking area. So what I'll do now is, because it is a little bit windy, I'll show you that you can actually cook inside. Obviously you need to be careful when you're doing this, and you need to make sure that you leave a little bit of ventilation to stop condensation. So I'll just leave that little bit up there. But you can see I can bring my feet inside quite easily and still be cooking here, still boiling the water, and I've still got plenty of other space here as well. And not to forget, you have got a second porch there all over again, so there's plenty of room to be doing things like this, especially when it's peeing it down outside and you just want to stay dry, but also cook a good nice warm meal. So it's quite windy right now, so maybe not the best weather for review, but I think it is actually perfect to demonstrate how good the Scarp is. So right now it keeps gusting to about, I would say, 30 to 35 mile per hour winds. So you can see it's quite windy right now, and the Scarp is not budging. This is with the extra crossing poles on, and now this would be the one thing I would say about the Scarp 2 compared to the Scarp 1. The crossing poles, I would say, are needed most of the time, because it is quite a lot of material that flaps around, if not anything above 20 mile per hour winds, and then the fly sheet starts to flap around. So I tend to use the crossing poles on the Scarp 2 quite a lot. But that still brings the weight to about 2.2 kilograms, which is actually fantastic for how much of a beast this tent is. As you can see from the outside, it's quite big, and I'd say that is the other main plus point for the Scarp, is that it is really roomy inside. So if I just take you around here, you can see that we've got the struts on the corners. This not only makes the tent really strong, so it helps with wind pushing against these and catching, but it also means that a lot of the space inside is usable. As you can see here as well, I've added the extra guy lines. Now this is a pet hate that I have of ultralight weight tent sellers. They often don't give you the actual weight of the tents with everything guyed out. So although on the Tarptent site it will say this weighs 2.2 kilograms with the crossing poles, in those scenarios where you're using the crossing poles, you're actually going to want 4 extra guy lines on to stabilise the tent. So that is going to add more weight, and you're looking to be more around about 2.3 kilograms or a little bit more with the tent stakes you're going to need for that. So that is something to bear in mind. As you can see, this is the older Scarp 2, so we've got the roof vents on here to help with condensation. So last night it dropped below 0, and we got absolutely no condensation last night, which was helped a lot by the wind, and we're also not near any water sources, although the ground is a little bit damp, but it performed excellently last night for condensation. So if I bring you around this way, I'll just show you what the tent looks like from the inside now. So this is the porch space. Something to note here, when you first get the Scarp, I was quite disappointed with the porch space. I was thinking this is not big enough to be usable, but the one thing to remember is that this is actually adjustable. So if you have it set out to take up all the porch space, you could fit potentially 3 people in there with slim mats. If, like me, you adjust the porch space to bring the inner to a smaller width, which is really not needed, there's still plenty of room for 2 people. It actually extends the vestibule area that you have here, and you can easily fit a 65 litre pack down into that gap there and have plenty of space to cook. One of the other things that I'm not a big fan of on this tent is the zippers. They're not as robust as on some other tents. They do the job, but when you have this guyed out and made really taut, the zippers are a little bit flimsy and you have to be careful with them. Had this out in all sorts of weather, minus 13 degrees conditions with snow, heavy rain, heavy winds. I've had this out in 40 mile plus winds and it's barely moved. So it is a really bomb-proof tent. If you're going up on the tops of the fells like me, this is the kind of tent you need. But yeah, that's the Scarp 2, and hopefully that was really useful for you. Enjoy, guys.